September 15th, 1940. The skies over southern England have become a crucible. For weeks, the Royal Air Force has battled the German Luftwaffe for control of the air, the only thing standing between Britain and invasion. But on this Sunday morning, as the radar scopes at Fighter Command fill with swarms of incoming aircraft, one question hangs in the smoke-filled air. What happens when a pilot has given everything, every bullet, every shell, and the enemy is still flying? Pause. What happens next would become the stuff of legend. This is the story of when pilots ran out of ammo over England and chose to ram the enemy instead. By mid-September 1940, the Battle of Britain had reached its critical phase. The Luftwaffe, under Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, believed they had Fighter Command on the ropes. German intelligence estimated the RAF had fewer than 300 serviceable aircraft left. The truth was different, but only slightly. Fighter Command was exhausted. Pilots were flying 3, 4, sometimes 5 sorties a day. Ground crews worked through the night patching bullet holes and changing engines. And replacement pilots, fresh from training with barely 10 hours on Spitfires or Hurricanes, were being thrown into battle and shot down within days. On the morning of September 15th, Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commander of No. 11 Group, the sector covering London and the southeast, received the intelligence reports. The weather over the Channel was clear. The Germans would come. Park had just 11 Group operational, roughly 200. Aircraft ready to scramble. Behind them, No. 12 Group could provide reinforcement. But coordination was uncertain. When Churchill, visiting the operations room at Uxbridge, asked Park what reserves remained, the Air Vice Marshal replied with chilling honesty, "There are none." The men who would fly that day came from everywhere: Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Poland, Czechoslovakia. They were young, most in their early 20s. They flew 2 types: the Supermarine Spitfire, sleek and agile, and the Hawker Hurricane, less glamorous but rugged and stable, the workhorse that would claim more German kills than any other British fighter. Among them was a 24-year-old flight sergeant from 504, squadron named Ray Holmes, and 250 miles away, over the French coast, Oberleutnant Robert Sebe of Kampfgeschwader 76 was climbing into his Dornier Do 17 bomber, unaware that his path and Holmes's were about to intersect in one of the most extraordinary moments of the war. At 11:30 a.m., the radar stations at Rye and Dover detected the first buildup. German aircraft were massing over Calais. 100, then 200, then 400 plots on the screens. Park scrambled his first squadrons at 11:35. By noon, every available fighter in 11 Group was airborne. The German formation that crossed the coast near Dungeness was enormous, approximately 500 bombers escorted by 600 fighters, stacked from 15,000 to 30,000 feet. At 12:10 p.m., the first RAF squadrons made contact. Hurricanes from 504 Squadron, based at Hendon, dove into the German formation. Ray Holmes was flying Hurricane P2725. Call sign TMB, he attacked a Dornier from the front, a head-on pass that gave the German gunners minimal time to react. He fired a long burst, saw strikes on the cockpit, and broke away. But as he banked for a second attack, he pressed the trigger, and nothing happened. Pause. His guns were empty. The Dornier, though damaged, was still flying, still heading for London, still carrying its bomb load. The impact was instantaneous and catastrophic. The Dornier's entire twin rudder tail section sheared off. The bomber, now uncontrollable, pitched forward violently. The G-forces so extreme that both wings snapped off, outboard of the engines. The wreckage tumbled towards central London, spiraling down in a death dive. Oberleutnant Sebe and his 3 crewmen had no chance to bail out. Their aircraft crashed onto the forecourt of Victoria Station, embedding itself in the railway tracks below. But Holmes's Hurricane had not escaped unscathed. The impact had torn his aircraft apart. Deprived of its wing section, the Hurricane tumbled vertically toward the city. Holmes struggled against the G-forces, fighting to push back the cockpit canopy. At 5,000 feet, he managed to release his harness and was immediately thrown clear by centrifugal force. He pulled his ripcord and watched as his Hurricane, P2725, slammed into the intersection of Buckingham Palace Road and Ebury Bridge, burying its engine 12 feet into the ground. Ray Holmes landed safely on a Chelsea rooftop, his parachute catching on a chimney. He was alive, but not without injury. He'd struck his head during the exit, and blood ran down his face as he descended. A crowd gathered immediately, Londoners, who had watched the entire spectacle from the streets below. A fire brigade photographer captured the crater where his hurricane had disappeared. At the nearby Orange Brewery on Pimlico Road, someone pressed a brandy into his hand. Historian Andy Saunders later described the act. It's very significant because it was an act of extreme heroism. Burton was recommended for the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest award for valor. For reasons lost to history, it was never granted. But on September 27, 2025, 85 years later, a park in Hailsham was renamed in his honor. His great-niece, Despina Learmonth, attended the ceremony, calling it momentous and saying, "I didn't realize it was of this magnitude that people really appreciated his sacrifice this much." September 15, 1940, would become known as Battle of Britain Day, the climatic engagement that broke the Luftwaffe's offensive. On that single day, the RAF destroyed 57 German aircraft and severely damaged 20 more. British losses stood at 29 fighters destroyed, with 14 pilots killed. The following day, German intelligence finally revised its estimates. The RAF was not on the verge of collapse. On September 17th, Hitler indefinitely postponed Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain. It would never be rescheduled. Ray Holmes survived the war, serving as a photo reconnaissance pilot and later as the King's messenger. For Prime Minister Winston Churchill, he returned to journalism and in 1989 published his autobiography, Sky Spy. In 2004, 64 years after his hurricane vanished into a London street, excavators digging at the crash site recovered the wreckage. The control column Holmes had last held on September 15, 1940, was still intact. The brass ring around the gun button was still set to fire. Percy Burton rests in Hailsham, where the town he died protecting has finally placed his name on a park bench, a cross, and a memorial sign. Inscribed there is a simple message, a reminder that when ammunition runs out, courage does not. Wing Commander Ken Mackenzie of 501. Squadron performed a similar act in October 1940, shearing the tail off a Messerschmitt 109 with his wing and crash landing near Folkestone. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross and nicknamed Super Mac by his comrades. These men, Holmes, Burton, Mackenzie, represent a handful of the nearly 3,000 RAF pilots who fought in the Battle of Britain. Of those, 544 gave their lives. They were young. They were outnumbered. And when their ammunition ran out, they kept fighting.